Hi, I'm Joel West from Continuing Forward, and it's my great pleasure to be interviewing my friend, Father Nick Harrelson, the priest in charge at St. Benedict's in Chapel Hill. So, Father Nick, welcome to the Continuing Forward webinar.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Now, your situation to me, we've talked for many years, but your situation to me seems a little bit different than many in the sense that you worshiped at St. Benedict's for quite a while before you became priest in charge. So can you kind of just talk about your how you came to St. Benedict's and sort of your early faith journey or life at St. Benedict's before you were installed as the priest in charge?
Absolutely. It's funny. I used to joke with the previous rector that I chose to worship at St. Benedict's in spite of St. Benedict's. And there was always a reverence. There was an appreciation of liturgy and the value of liturgy at St. Benedict's. I think that's one of the things that we've always done really well, and that was initially what kind of caught my eye. And I'm a bit of a liturgical and theological nerd, and there's not too many of us. I mean, we're here, but there's not too many of us out there that type of thing is enough to kind of bring them through the door. But for me, that was the case, and so I always appreciated that about St. Benedict's. But I found St. Benedict's right prior to beginning seminary at Duke. And I started worshiping there as just a regular layperson as I was going into Duke for seminary.
And
And
what was that?
that was it would have been roughly 2017, 2018 timeframe.
Oh,
Uh,
before the pandemic.
Yep, before the pandemic. Yep. Which you never would have even known there was a pandemic if you were a worshiper at St. Benedict's. The It had no effect on us, it seems. But yeah, so I was there for several years, upwards of 5 or 6 years, as a layperson before I graduated and was ordained a deacon initially.
And then you were doing the priest 2 years ago this month, 3 years ago this month.
Yes. Yes. Wow. It's hard to believe. It simultaneously feels like much longer, much further in the distance, and not something that happened yesterday. So, but yes, 3 years this month. Wow, that's really interesting to think about.
Well, and since you joined in 2017, you've also, I think, been working on how can I say, a friend of ours used to say, making Anglicans the fun way. So expanding the kingdom of God, the old
Yes,
fashioned.
yes. I've had some pretty amazing experiences when I really think back on it in the Anglican Catholic
I was
Church.
referring to the growth of your family, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. No, when I started this whole endeavor, it was just me and my wife. And in that time, it's now me, my wife, 3 children, 4 dogs, and 2 cats. So yeah, we've certainly expanded. Just that's its own stressful ordeal. But
Yeah. Okay. And how long have you been priest in charge?
I've been priest in charge now at St. Benedict's for let me think. For about, hold on, let's see. I started in January of 2025.
A
So
little over a year.
little over a year, yeah.
Oh,
And it gets confusing for me at times because there's been several big shuffles in leadership there
right.
as of recent, and so remembering which one was which is sometimes it's a blur. But I've been there as the only priest, the only clergyman since September of this year. Father Hart was the rector emeritus for a time, and then moved out to Arizona.
Got it.
And so then it was just me from about September on.
Yeah. And I recall in talking to you about both before and after you took over as priest in charge, some of the ideas you had and things you wanted to work on. And one of the things that kind of struck me, and it's a story that we've heard it continuing forward over and over again, is the importance of a lot of this sort of what some people might call the little things or the ordinary things.
Yeah,
And as a sociologist or somebody reads sociology, they talk about legitimacy and credibility. that you come to an organization, you've never heard of them, you don't know them. And some organizations, by their nature, are credible or legitimate, or they seem like they know what they're doing, and others don't. And did you
Yeah,
make like a conscious effort to try to work on that sort of reputation, credibility, et cetera?
I did. And there's been a lot of time and work put into that. Initially we really had to work with just the congregation that we had there. I said about St. Benedict's, one of the things that we've always done well is liturgy. And unfortunately, that was all that we did at St. Benedict's for a time. And that consisted of Sunday morning worship. There really wasn't a whole lot else going on. We had a Wednesday low mass that we would do, but it was all liturgical in nature. Um, and so one, I came in and I kind of recognized that that is one thing that we do well, but we've got to develop. There's a couple of things to develop. One is kind of consistency in doing what we say we're going to do, whether it's a Zoom evening prayer that we're going to do weekly, or we're going to do an even song monthly. Like if we say we're going to do something, we do it and we start it at the time that it's supposed to start, and we're prepared for it. That maintaining that consistency was a big thing.
And
And
does that also mean then that you don't worry about how many people show up? You just
yes,
do
no,
it whether or not there's an audience?
yes, yes. And look, that's yeah, I mean, there's been so many times that I've ended up doing something that I have talked up for a month, and it ends up just being me and like two other people. That happens frequently happened frequently at the beginning. It is much less of a concern a year into things now. But you do it. If you say you're going to do it, you do it, and you do it when you say you're going to do it. You start at the right times. You have the things that you can controlled, like the bulletins. You when it comes to the facilities, you have them presentable. Like you take all of these steps that you can control and you control them. Um, and then the other kind of key thing that we identified pretty early on, there was a lack of community at St. Benedict's.
Can we come back to that?
Yeah,
Because I think some of the stuff you just talked about, people show up and things start on time and they happen when you say they're going to do. Were there any other sort of, for lack of a better term, tells or warning signs or red flags that maybe might have put people off once upon a time that you kind of wanted to get rid of, that you kind of felt that maybe, like, for example, bulletins. I know, having visited a lot of church, if they don't even have a bulletin, I don't care what the bulletin is, but if they don't have a bulletin for a Sunday service, I wonder how much do they have their act together if they can't even print, one half of one side of one piece of paper.
yeah. I mean, so we bulletins in particular have been something that we're working to develop extensively at St. Benedict's. In fact, we just implemented a new mass booklet that has the full liturgy contained within it for that specific service. And that was something that I picked up from the Diocese of the Holy Trinity that they do very well there.
And
And
why is that important? Because a lot of people say, "Oh, let's don't kill the trees. Everybody knows the liturgy
right.
anyway,
Yeah,
et
no,
cetera."
well, so my own family was able to present the importance to me. My sister, who is not does not have a liturgical bone in her body, she came for a service, and we had the little kind of fold over single sheet, and she leaned over to my wife and said, kind of tapped her on the shoulder and said, "This would be really helpful, but I don't know what BCP is." And everything was listed BCP page number. And so we're in a college town. A lot of the people that we're seeing now are younger families, college students, graduate students, things like that. A lot of them have very little liturgical background to speak of, and so yes, the single page bulletin is really helpful for people who have that background and that knowledge. But if you don't even know what BCP means, It's hard to, I imagine, and listening to my sister, she would tell you it's very difficult to follow anything that's going on. And while that can be, something that is overwhelming for some people, it might not be for others, and they kind of sit back and they just take it all in. But there's a ton of people who walk through the door that if they had a means of feeling a little bit more immersed in the liturgy as it's happening, it might not feel so overwhelming for them on that first or second try coming through the door.
Well, so and you hit on something else that I think that all of the churches in the continuum face, whether they recognize it or not, which is how, other than the booklet, what other things do you need to look at your church and how a visitor sees it that will be seen differently by an ex-evangelical or a former Roman Catholic or somebody who has no Christian background versus the cradle Episcopalians that filled the continuum for the first 10 or 20 years, after the
Right.
Congress of St. Louis and the Denver ordinations, which is what consecration, which is what we were focused on for so many years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, there's, and that's another key thing that might be a little bit different for St. Benedict's than it is elsewhere. We have a wide range of people coming through the door. We have former Roman Catholics, we have current Roman Catholics, we have Spanish-speaking Episcopalians who do not speak English who are part of our church now. It is a wide range of individual who comes through the door, and so there I know that kind of one of the things that a lot of continuing churches were stuck on was sort of this identity, identifying ourselves by what we are not. And that's a battle that happened long before my time. I was never a part of the Episcopal Church. And
Right.
so I have no, that is not a hill that I'm prepared to die on. And I think a lot of churches have a tendency to get stuck in this place where they're identifying themselves by either the things they're not doing or the things that they're doing well, when in reality, what the church needs to focus on is being a community of people who live life together in pursuit of Christ. And
We,
to
we
do
definitely want to
that,
come back to that. But
okay.
what else, other than liturgy, was there anything else that created confusion or uncertainty or just a lack of familiarity for these people coming through the doors who had never set foot in an Episcopal or Anglican church before? Was there anything else you spotted that came up over and over again that you had to address or proactively anticipate?
No, there really there hasn't been a whole lot that has presented itself as being a barrier outside of just ensuring that people feel welcomed when they come in. That if a person will allow for a lot of things to be subpar, so long as they feel like they have been welcomed into the group. And so having the mass booklets, that is an aspect of that,
Right.
ensuring that they are spoken to if they walk in 10 minutes before the mass is supposed to start, that someone has greeted them, that someone has welcomed them to say, hey, we're going to have a coffee hour afterwards, please join us, we'd love to get to know a little bit more about you. One of the things that I tried to dissuade people from doing very early on is there was a tendency to try to corner someone after the mass so they couldn't run to their car and get out, and then do a deep dive investigation into their religious background, where they're going currently, why they're looking for a new church, and then give them a book 10-point bullet list reasons for why they should not be where they are and should be here. um, that is all stuff that is very valuable, I think, but it is stuff that is valuable to learn outside of the person's first time walking through the door.
Got it. It's funny you should mention. I've never seen that particular example, but I can picture it. The two, having gone to a lot of small parishes, I've seen two different models. One of which is the indifference. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm going to talk to my friends because I haven't seen them in 6 hours, 6 days and 23 hours. And I'm not going to talk to this random stranger who may or may not come back.
Right, right,
Or the exact opposite, the desperation. Oh my God, a young family with children. Oh, we've got to get them to stay. Oh, what can
right,
we do? What can we
right.
give them? How can we show them love and attention?
Right. And look, this is it's a multifaceted approach that feels difficult to implement at the beginning because you're simultaneously trying to develop the community that is present so that by the time someone new walks through the door, there is this when you walk through the door of a historic liturgical church, you will almost instantly know whether or not this place has a developed community or not.
Mhm.
And it is something, it's intangible. I don't know exactly what it is. I've always been able to sense it, and I know that others are able to as well. It is impossible to corner someone after the service and beat them over the head with all the reasons they should be there. When they walked through the door, there were five other people there, and none of them spoke to each other before the service began. It's just not going to work. And so that's it's difficult to do because you're trying to simultaneously develop the community that is present so that by the time new people walk through the door, you don't have to advertise to them. They will see
Right,
a
right.
community of people that I wish to have this in my life. And it
Okay,
becomes its own advertisement.
so let's tease those out. You've got the sense of community and the sense of hospitality,
Right.
and clearly the community comes before the hospitality. But if you're the rector taking over a church that doesn't have a sense of community, are there some obvious milestones or tells or metrics or triumphs that you can say, "Hey, we're heading in the right direction," or we've got this process, the ball rolling down the hill?
Absolutely. I think my first Sunday that I was there, we had five people in the pews that Sunday. Um, and that you extrapolate that out, there's probably 20 to 30 active people in the parish that are there once or twice a month. Um, so the first thing we did was really, I think I spent about a month at announcements, a 30-second, 1 minute, what have you, where I was talking to people about what community is
Mhm.
and why it is valuable to us as individuals and as a church. And so I spent about a month doing that. And then we decided that the next best step to do would be to, we have a captive-ish audience here. Let's just corral them into a coffee hour afterwards. Let them sit and talk for 30 minutes over a cup of coffee and some food and get to know each other again. And so we
So,
started.
so basically, you have the vision casting, as our evangelical friends would say, and then you institute the eighth sacrament of the Episcopal Church, which is coffee.
Yes, yes. And Bishop Scarlett will be quick to remind you that the coffee has to be good.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
that yeah, we learned that pretty quick as well. Like it's a lot easier to hold people captive with a good cup of coffee as opposed to a very bad cup of coffee. So he's spot on with that one.
Does the
But
quality of the snacks matter, or just the quality of the coffee?
the quality of the snacks are always that was always nothing that we had to worry about. And people were
Okay,
pretty good at bringing their own good foods to eat.
okay.
But it probably does matter. So if you're bringing some subpar food in, you might want to change that too. But no, so we started doing that, and very quickly it grew organically of its own accord. We initially set it up as a 30-minute thing. That 30-minute thing turned into an hour thing. Within a couple of months, there were ladies bringing food for it, and it turned into its own coffee hour slash luncheon. And then, it turns out that a lot of these people who thought they knew each other really well really did not know that many people that well in the church. And so they were reintroduced to each other again and realized that they liked a lot of these people. And so, with that having been established, the next big goal was to start developing extracurricular things to do outside of the liturgy, outside of Sunday Mass.
So in other words, a church that wasn't just 1 hour out of 168 a week.
Right, right. And so the first thing we did, and again, another a page out of the playbook of Bishop Scarlett was the fellowship event. We do a monthly fellowship gathering, and we would do it at a different parishioner's home each month. Now, mind you, there in the beginning there were probably 4 or 5 of them held consecutively at my house, but again, it's another one of those kind of milestone markers. They are very infrequently held at my house now, which is a wonderful thing. But so we started off with that, and very quickly, it was 15 to 20 people were showing up, but they were all in. We would root it in liturgy by starting with evening prayer, and then people would bring cigars, they'd bring drinks, we'd gather around a fire. We sometimes do it on the new property that we have now. We'll set up a big bonfire and bring out a generator with string lights, and so that has grown into something that is almost too large to do at a parishioner's home now. We have between 30 and 40 people who show up for those once a month now, which is
Now,
wonderful.
where did that come from? I mean, was there ever an Anglican church you went to or that had this strong sense of community, or did you just have this vision that of something better that you wanted and you thought was out there, but you hadn't seen it before?
Well, both. I worked with Bishop Scarlett in Colorado with the Colorado mission community out there, and a lot of what I have done at St. Benedict's was already successful in the work that we did in Colorado, and again replicated from the work that was done at St. Thomas and in Fullerton, and the work that was done at St. Matthew's. And so it really was, in a sense, replicating that, and it beautifully transitioned to the Southeast here in North Carolina. People love to get together and have a good time. And so that has, and I've been able to extrapolate that in many different ways. We have a men's group that started simultaneous to the fellowship event, and so we meet at a different pub or a different bar or a different brewery in town or around one of the towns in this area each month. And our college students really enjoy that, so they're bringing all of their friends, and then our oldest parishioner, who is 91, is one of his favorite things to do during the month is to come out to the men's group. And so it's really kind of interesting being able to find these singular events that can kind of encapsulate the entirety of your community. Like, it doesn't matter if you were confirmed in the Episcopal Church in 1947 or confirmed in the Anglican Catholic Church in 2021. Everyone enjoys feeling a part of a community, and so it's a great thing.
Well, another thing you're kind of, I think, hinting at is both at St. Matthew's with some of our events, not all of them, but also my REC buddies in Dallas talk about having these liminal spaces where you have people who are parishioners, but also people who are not parishioners
Right.
who
Yeah.
feel this is an event I can come to without having to learn to do the prayer book or share your beliefs or even do this God thing. But just, my friend thinks it's a cool thing, so I'll come with him and give him a try. And so are there some events that are consciously intended to bridge those two audiences, or is it just sort of a general thing that you do for pretty much anything other than your worship events?
Well, the only thing I've ever found liturgically that the Anglican Church does well, that feels open to people who are not part of the Anglican Church, is like a choral evensong. People love coming to those, and even we're getting ready to start one here. It is already seems to be a popular thing for our Roman Catholic friends in town, that they plan to come to that. But that is really the only thing I've ever identified liturgically that people feel, for whatever reason, welcome to attend, even if they aren't part of the community. You
Well,
know,
it kind of feels sort of like a classical concert.
Right, right. Well, I mean, certainly, I don't hope to qualify what we're doing as such, but I mean, Yeah, it certainly it has its place, but I think what's so great about these kind of the community events is that you're doing two tasks at once. You are furthering the community sense of your own parish by hosting these things and bringing these people together, but you are also working simultaneously to bring new people in to be part of the community. And I think it should be made very clear we have people who their only connection to our parish is by way of the men's group. They have not done a single other thing with our community yet, but they come to men's group religiously. And
Religiously?
well, once a month, if you want to call that religiously, they're there
Do you
every.
have any prayer at the men's group, or do you have any scriptural readings or religious books or anything like that? Or
We do not as of yet. It is the only thing that we do that is not rooted in liturgy as it's the first thing that we do together. And the reason for that, we've certainly left it open. I think that there is some talk about eventually doing like a book study together. And bringing some sort of theological. I mean, there's always a theological aspect to what it is we're doing. I mean, I mean, for instance, we have one of the most prominent Roman Catholic theologians, Dr. Kevin Hart at Duke University. He is there every single month.
wow.
And so and then we have multiple other professors from UNC, and so there is always some sort of theological discussion going on, even if there isn't a liturgical aspect to the men's group.
Well,
Um,
let me offer just a suggestion. Um, what if rather than a book, because book clubs are controversial. Some people
right,
like book clubs and some people don't like book clubs, and some people are already in three book clubs and don't want to join a fourth one.
right,
You know, but what if you added an optional evening prayer just before the men's group? And so if you don't want to deal with this praying thing, you just come at 6 o'clock, and if you want to do the praying thing, you come at 5:45.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that is a very good idea. We looked at we're currently trying to set up a women's group and just did our first kind of foray into that. And one of the barriers that I personally felt with setting up a women's group is that I myself am in fact not a woman. And
I
so
noticed that.
right, the things I'm able to do with the men's group are not necessarily things that are easily done in the women's group. And so, one of the ideas we had for that was for me to offer a liturgy, whether it's morning prayer or a mass, a low mass, for specifically for the women, where they would meet at the church. I would be there early. It would allow for time for spiritual direction, time for confession, and then a short mass, and then they go off to brunch or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we're currently looking at trying to do that.
So you basically have a deliberate effort to say, here's the part which involves the priest, who last time we checked was a guy, and
Right,
here is the stuff that is run by the women for the women,
right.
without any the priest or any other man looking on.
Yes, and it's because, and again, took this words out of Bishop Scarlett's mouth. Everything we do should be rooted in liturgy. Liturgy doesn't have to be the sole reason for or the end all. It doesn't have to be the focus of what we're doing, but it should, being a historic liturgical faith, it should be rooted in liturgy. And so I've taken that to heart, primarily because I'm currently in a stage where I'm trying to convince many different people that the kind of living authentically as an Anglican is necessarily living a life of a rhythm of prayer and worship.
Mhm.
And so, right now, that's one of my big things that I'm working on with people is to really convince them that whether we do it corporately or we do it individually,
Mhm.
daily morning and evening prayer necessarily is a part of being Anglican.
Right.
And so this is an effort to push for that by doing evening prayer as the very first thing we do in the fellowship gathering. It is trying to provide an example of how this would work in your life. And so we're still working on that to a degree, as a growing community. But I think the thing that has convinced me over time is, having worked with Bishop Scarlett out in Colorado, and then seeing the results of all the work that's been done at St. Matthew's and St. Thomas and other places. When you really do root yourselves in liturgy, when you live authentically into the tradition and the history that we have as Anglicans, there's an intangible value to doing that and demonstrating it to others. We've had this Christianity thing figured out for 2,000 years now. There's no need to develop anything new or better. It has already been thought of and addressed at some point. And that's one of the key things for me. I feel like is look, we have a way of being authentically Anglican. And so long as we are always pursuing that by rooting ourselves in liturgy, by living a life that is based in the rhythms of prayer and worship, the weekly, daily rhythms of prayer and worship, that is its own appealing thing to everyone. There is an appeal to that kind of stability, that normalcy, that the modern life seems to lack to a significant degree.
Well, and there's I'm old enough to remember this folkish song, They Will Know We Are Christians by Our Love, which was kind of hijacked by a certain group within the church. But, that's clearly riffing off of St. Paul in a
Right,
legitimate way. And in Bishop Scarlett, in his liturgy for mission, talks about how it may please you to fill us for such love for one another that all may perceive in our midst the presence of Christ,
right.
quoting John 13.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
therefore, it does seem as though if we are in fact living out a Christian life formed by our faith and formed by our prayer and our habits, which Jamie Smith would call, you are what you love,
Right,
the
right.
people should be able to tell that. Or as there was the old joke, if you were indicted for being a Christian, could you be convicted based on the available evidence?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean yeah, I think that's a really great way of looking at it. You necessarily become that which you do. And so it makes perfect sense that, in trying to sell any of this to people, that you yourself and your community that you're a part of have to be doing them habitually. And that's, I think there's so many distracting things in the modern world. And when it comes to the various ways churches I choose to identify themselves today, most of them seem to have kind of lost the script that this was all about what it was. I mean, it's all about Christ, but it's all about community as well. It should be kind of a summation of, the summary of the law and loving God and loving others. And that just becomes incredibly evident whether or not it exists in your community quickly to anyone who walks through the door.
Right.
And all of these things are an effort to further our love for God and our love for each other.
Even so, once you create a sense of community, it still does feel like there is sort of a culture shift that's required to get people to think about how they approach the stranger who walks through the door in a genuine, loving fashion, wanting to share that sense of community with somebody sincerely and not seeing them as either an annoyance that interrupts what they really want to do or
Yeah,
a butt in
right,
seat that can help pay the bills and keep the doors open because if we don't
right.
get another 20 people we're gonna have to close up shop.
Right. No, it is. It's difficult. And the only way that I've found capable of doing such was by doing it myself. I had to pursue people. I had to chase people down by, I want to meet with you for coffee sometime, just want to chat. I want to get to know a little bit more about you. Please, would you afford me that opportunity? And so I did that for months upon months with just the community that we had. And these were with people that I'd known for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, but I'd never had coffee with them. I'd never, broke bread with them. We never did anything outside of mass. And so when people kind of got the sense that I was serious about this stuff that I was talking about through my actions, they then themselves, one, I think that they enjoy the interaction. They enjoy getting to know the people that they view as their mentors, as their spiritual directors and guides. I think that there's a quality to that people. It's wonderful when you feel like you know the people in your life that are of significance to you. And so I didn't have to beat people over the head after a while. Like they kind of figured it out and started replicating it with each
Got
other,
it.
and it's great when people can pick something up and then do it themselves. It makes it a lot easier for me. And so yeah, it's something that I think people pick up on quick and will replicate themselves.
Yeah, it's really striking to me. I worship at Newport at St. Matthew's, and it's striking to me. I noticed in the last year or two that when a newcomer comes in, often there'll be 3 or 4 people who say, "Wait, this person is probably new. I had to talk to them, or I had to introduce them to somebody, or I had to let somebody know." And so it's not like one person's job to greet the newcomer, which in some places
Right.
they make it a formal job. It's more like, hmm, this person either is new or might be new, or at least early. And I personally ought to make them feel welcome, even though
Right.
I'd rather go talk to I was planning on talking to my friends, but I'll spend, 5 minutes talking to this person who was right next to me.
Right. And kind of one of the key elements for me has been if you're able to get the community that is there invested enough into the building of community, they will take it upon themselves because they have a personal stake and interest in
Mhm.
this community to go out and try to bring people into it. When people love and cherish something in their life
Yeah,
that much, they necessarily want people to experience it.
yeah, yeah,
And that's, it is a multifaceted approach where you are attacking this whole thing from multiple different angles. And it takes a lot of effort from this angle, a lot of effort from this angle, and eventually you gain traction somewhere and they all start falling into place and building off each other. I mean, man, I've felt so many different emotions in my work of trying to build community. But it can feel despairing at times. It can feel depressing. But it really is. You focus on providing stability. You focus on being consistent with the things you say you're going to do. You really you very openly pursue people, and eventually all of these things start coming together, and then people experience that from the angle of the priest pursuing them. They enjoy it, they enjoy what they're a part of, and then they themselves go out and replicate the entire process with others.
yeah, yeah. So let's kind of maybe bring this to a conclusion. So there still are some churches out there in the continuum, believe it or not, that are not doing this. I know you might find that hard to believe, but so suppose you went to a town, a diocese, small diocese, or a deanery, or a clericus meeting, or whatever, and you knew for a fact that you had a lot of small, relatively insular, relatively struggling parishes there, and maybe with rectors who'd been there for a while and had done things the same way for a long period of time, or maybe a few brand new rectors who didn't know what to do because they found something that was struggling and didn't know where to start. So what
Yeah.
would you say if you had like 5 minutes just to either give a talk to these people or maybe just talk to them in the hallway afterwards? What would you tell them to start with to get from the dysfunctional, static, just focused on running the service every week to something that has more of a sense of community and more sense of welcoming?
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways I think people can approach it. I think kind of the most universal way that it could be replicated is by identifying someone within the community, whether it is the rector, but it doesn't have to be the rector. Sometimes with the ACC and how our structures are set up, we have bivocational priests who can't devote their entire 40 hours a week, 80 hours a week to being a priest. And so the key thing is identifying someone within the community who understands the need for community and allowing them to run with whatever ideas they have that they think will work on how to build community outside of church. If they want to try a fellowship event, if they, I think that the fellowship events once a month at a parishioner's house has been invaluable to us. If they want to try a men's group because they have a large number of guys who they think would be interested and would show up, that is another way to do it. The women's group, really, the kind of key here is you will only develop community outside of the liturgy. The liturgy is not where we become a church. We become a church outside of the liturgy, and the liturgy is the ultimate expression of worship as a community. And so people just need to find someone who is willing to coordinate and get together and contact people and set things up logistically for some type of extracurricular event outside of church. That
So,
is, what's that?
yeah, so to use management speak, you're basically saying you want to empower members of your parish to create and lead ministries that can be
Yes.
used to strengthen the sense of community in your parish.
Yes, I think that is for us, at least in my experience, in multiple different places. To build a church, you first have to build community, and that work necessarily occurs outside of the liturgy.
And
Um,
but you're also saying that the sense of community comes not from any specific ministry, but by an intentional approach that encourages multiple ministries.
yes, yes, I think that is by far the most efficient way to do it. Certainly, you can focus on any particular ministry, but I think yes, that broad approach is the most efficient way to do it.
Did you ever have any on your ministries or your community efforts? Did you ever have any sort of upside surprises? You mentioned you had some things where you invited people and you didn't get quite as many people as you thought, particularly early on.
Yeah.
But is there anything that kind of surprised you that took off maybe more quickly or in a way that you hadn't anticipated?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Many different times. And of course, I can't trying to think. I mean, there are specific ones that come to mind, but there have been many instances where I like low Sunday, for instance, after Easter. We almost broke 60 for the first time since I've been at St. Benedict's. It was 56 on Easter. And I figured low Sunday, it's literally nicknamed that because people don't come to church on low Sunday. I think we had over 40 on low Sunday. And so I thanked everyone for making it, in fact, not a very low Sunday. But if I'm thinking kind of more big picture, we had a year ago, Mr. or excuse me, Dr. Ben Musacchio, who is a valuable, loved member of our community now, but he just showed up on our doorstep one day. He and his wife moving to the area, and he had just joined UNC as faculty. But they were professional singers. And so they have a ton of experience with TLM communities, with big Anglo-Catholic Episcopal churches, singing in all these different environments. And they just showed up on our doorstep one day, having been recommended to at least check out St. Benedict's before they went elsewhere. And very quickly, they kind of fell into St. Benedict's and started volunteering their services as cantors. And so very quickly, the community loved the duets that they would do together. And so we started working on some opportunities to bring in some other professional singers that they knew. And so before you know it, we're having a monthly quartet who joins us. And then with that being the case, we then have now started expanding out to looking for a new music director. And so this entire ministry of music has formed at St. Benedict's that really was just something that it was by happenstance one day. It all started with one person coming to church one Sunday, and I was lucky enough to be there and took interest in this person and met him for coffee and found out they do professional singing. And here we are a year later, and there's been this entire series of events that have occurred that all happened out of chance. And so that is
Or
certainly
Providence?
looking back. Yes, providentially, of course, but it's really a powerful, at least from my perspective, it's a very powerful example of God in work, in action at St. Benedict's.
Where do you go from here? What would you like to do differently over the next 12 months?
Oh wow, that's a good question. One of the things that we are doing differently, and we're really excited about this. There's never been an intentional engagement of the local universities by St. Benedict's. Um, the question has been thrown around for many years as to why we weren't, but the answers that were given were various and numerous. But we've started a very targeted advertising campaign towards new students that are coming in at both UNC and Duke. And that has taken a little bit of money, but I think it's going to bear a lot of fruit. And then I'm meeting with some of the local ACNA parishes and some of the individuals who are in the ACNA but are part of UNC as well to really kind of pick their brains on what they've been doing to engage the universities, because they've done it really well in the past, and thankfully they've been very open to helping and providing their experiences. But we're hoping to be at both schools' orientations the first week, and just making our presence known to new students as they're arriving. I think that is something that other churches have done really, really well, and that we have not made any effort at doing in the last few years. And so I'm really excited about what the potential that holds. I think we have a lot of good examples in our various jurisdictions in the continuing movement of really strong university parishes, whether it's All Saints in Charlottesville, the APA parish there, St. Stephen's down in Georgia in Athens, St. Matthew's with Biola. I think there's a lot to be said about getting a core constituency that is from the local university that really does a tremendous amount in developing community.
And if you stood up at the new student welcome and you spoke just after the ACNA priest or priestess, uh, and people and you had 30 seconds to say why they should come to you rather than some other Anglican church, what would you say? What would you tell them in the elevator pitch about why St. Benedict's should be the place that they should come to?
I mean, there's many different ways you could go about it, but I think
You got 30 seconds.
yeah, right. The thing that I go back to and will harp on again is that we are living the Anglican life in the most authentic expression that you will find. That there are many options around town that are Anglican in some sense. Um, but we are truly living the authentic expression of Anglicanism in its Anglo-Catholic form.
Mhm.
And that means living a life in community with others in pursuit of Christ. And so that would be my biggest pitch. And I think it would be, depending on who spoke in front of me, it might be a little bit more defined in how we're pursuing authenticity. But I think that really is kind of the thing it all comes down to. People are looking for community in this modern world, which is incredibly hard to find because we live such isolated lives in connection to one another. Um, and I think people appreciate that authenticity, they appreciate that community, and they appreciate kind of secondarily, they appreciate the liturgical, the kind of forms and liturgical expressions that we have to offer. That should never be the thing that we run with as our first thing in identifying ourselves, but it really is kind of the backbone and structure of what our communities are.
So we are an Anglican community formed by prayer and worship.
Yes. Yes.
There you go. 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's the good 10-second clip. Mine was closer to a minute, but I'll work.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Father Nick, for your time and for your inspirational example. And if people want to know more about what you do, can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to contact and talk to anyone who wants to talk about this stuff. I love being able to help where I can.
Great. Thanks so much. We appreciate you joining us.
All right. Thank you, sir. It's good to see
Uh-huh.
you again.
Bye-bye.